Today we're going to be discussing whether or not chocolate is safe to eat. And this is based off the recent Consumer Reports report about high levels of lead and cadmium in chocolate bars. In many chocolate bars, actually all of them tested had lead and cadmium in them, and many of them that were tested had lead and cadmium that was above the California allowable dose limit for daily dosage for both cadmium and lead. And so what I want to do is review the Consumer Reports article, and I'm going to add some context to the story because I actually test people for cadmium and lead. Those are two of the toxic metals that I test people for. And so I'm pretty familiar with both of them, the health consequences of them, where they come from in the environment. And I think I could provide some context to help you understand the situation and whether or not we should be eating chocolate. So let's go ahead and take a look at the article. So this article is from December 2022. It was published in the Consumer Reports magazine in February of 2023, and it's really based on past research involving chocolate and toxic metals in chocolate, which was a lot of that research was done in 2014 by a group, an organization called 𝘂𝐴𝑠𝑢𝑠_, which tested over 400 chocolate bars and found that about over half of them had lead and cadmium above the allowable dose limit. So very high amounts of lead and cadmium in over half of chocolate bars. So we're going to review this article and see where this lead and cadmium is coming from and what's going on with the chocolate. So it starts off by explaining that many people choose dark chocolate as a healthier choice of chocolate because it is lower in sugar. That's the main reason I think many people think dark chocolate, including myself. I would have thought that dark chocolate was healthier because it has less sugar in it. And this article starts out by pointing out that dark chocolate actually had the most problems surrounding the lead and cadmium contamination. So let's read a little bit about this article. So for 23 of the bars, eating just an ounce a day would put an adult over a level that the public health authorities and CR experts, Consumer Report experts, say may be harmful for at least one of those heavy metals. So each of these bars, they had varying levels of lead and cadmium. Some were higher in cadmium, some were higher in lead. And it notes that long-term exposure to even small amounts of heavy metals can lead to a variety of health problems. And that's absolutely true, and that's absolutely our circumstance today. We are exposed to small amounts, in many cases, chronically, consistently, of these heavy metals, lead and cadmium just being just two of many. And they say the danger is greatest for pregnant people. Kind of a woke, looks like a woke leaning here, and young children, because the metals cause developmental problems, affect brain development, and lead to lower IQ, says 𝘂𝙀𝗪𝗪, the CR food safety researcher. And that's true. So lead is known to lower a person's IQ level. I think pregnant women exposed to lead, and this is true for a lot of toxic metals, fluoride, and probably other toxic metals. It lowers your IQ. These toxic metals affect your brain, and they can make you stupid. Lead also causes a very severe type of anemia, causes reproductive disorders, nervous system disorders like seizures and tremors, mental and emotional symptoms. Lead is heavily, and cadmium as well, actually, is strongly associated with violent behavior. And many people know that lead replaces calcium in the bones. So if you're low on calcium, your body will sort of grab more of the lead that you're ingesting. It will absorb more so that it can build your bones when calcium is deficient. And then, of course, throughout your life, your body is resorbing your bones. If your blood levels of calcium fall within a certain range, if they decline, then the body's going to take some calcium from your bones to replenish that. During that process, if you have a lot of lead stored up in your bones, which many people do, you're going to release lead during that process, and that can be detrimental. That can cause symptoms. By the way, lead is very epidemic. Lead toxicity, everyone is affected by this, and this is mainly due to leaded gasoline. So for decades, from the 1920s, I believe, to about the 1970s, lead was used in gasoline as an anti-knocking agent. And so it spewed lead, millions of tons of lead along the roadsides everywhere around the world. So now we have this lead dust basically everywhere. It blows around. Obviously, it gets into the soils. And these toxic metals are persistent, meaning that they don't break down and they stay there for good. Plants will take them up eventually, but they don't degrade. And so millions of tons of lead is just on the surface of the earth, basically. And that has caused body lead amounts to be significantly higher than ever. There was one study where they tested a skeleton or several skeletons from, I guess, thousands of years ago. And then they compared that with the bones of humans today. And the levels of lead in humans today was up to 1,500 times more than they were in these prehistoric skeletons. So we all are dealing with the consequences of lead accumulation in our body. And lead is one of the most studied toxic metals. So many people are familiar with the detrimental effects of lead, and they know to avoid it at all costs. Old paint is also a major source of lead and was a major source of lead. Okay, then the article goes to talk about some of the effects of lead in adults: hypertension, high blood pressure, immune suppression, kidney damage, reproductive issues, and says that 15% of people eat chocolate every day, which is interesting. And that lead and cadmium can be found in many other foods as well, such as sweet potatoes, spinach, and carrots. And this is the problem with the food supply today. We have all these metals in the environment for various reasons, and certain plants have a propensity to take up certain minerals and toxic metals. So some plants may be more likely to take up arsenic from the soil, such as rice, actually, which Consumer Reports did a similar report about the contamination of rice probably about 10 years ago. So many people know that rice, just about all of it, is contaminated with arsenic today. So certain plants take up certain minerals more than others. And this appears to be the case with cadmium in the cocoa bean, the cocoa plant. Then the article notes that about 5 of the chocolate bars tested, which they tested about 28 in this study, 5 of them had relatively low levels of both lead and cadmium. So it notes that there is safe options, and there are likely ways that chocolate producers and growers can reduce the lead and cadmium contamination in chocolate. And so here are the results by brand of the lead levels and cadmium levels in chocolate. And I'll take you through this slowly so you can look at your favorite chocolate bars and see which ones have high levels of lead and cadmium, which ones don't. And these levels, these percentages here, are based on the percentage of California's maximum allowable dose level for lead, which is 0.5 micrograms, and cadmium, which is 4.1 micrograms. And that's per day. So the percentage of that maximum allowable dosage per day. And as you can see, this brand Mast has the lowest levels of cadmium and lead. Lead being 14% of the maximum allowable dosage, cadmium at 40%. And don't forget that really any amount of these toxic metals are not good. Your body can eliminate some of it, of course, but you really want to avoid it all when you can. And again, that's pretty hard to do because a lot of the food today is contaminated. The soils are contaminated, so it's going to end up in our food and our water. But Mast looks like it's one of the better brands. 𝚪𝚪 is looks like it's a little worse, has about double the amount than Mast. 𝘄𝗓𝗪 is a popular brand. They have a moderate amount, almost 100%. One of them almost 100% of the limit for cadmium. And this brand 𝘂𝙪 has, these are considered safer choices, but they still have, you know, a pretty significant amount of lead and cadmium. Then we go down to the ones high in cadmium, and we'll go through these a little more quickly, just so you can get you can pause the video if you want to check out any of these individually. Higher in cadmium, and you'll notice a lot of it's the extra dark chocolate, these high dark chocolate ones, and again, that's because, well, we'll explain that later in the article. So, and then you have high in lead, Tony's, Trader Joe's, almost double the amount of lead here. This one has more than double the amount, double the limit for lead. This Hershey's almost triple. And then you have ones both high in lead and cadmium. And this brand here, Green and Blacks, I'm familiar with this one. You can buy this one in Target. This one has pretty high amounts of both lead and cadmium, well over 100, well over the maximum daily limit, safe level. So as you can see, a lot of these brands, these popular brands, even the organic brands, you might find surprising, have lots of lead and cadmium in them. So let's find out why that's the case. And so the article goes on to explain why dark chocolate seems in many cases to have higher levels of cadmium in particular. And we talked about lead, where it's from, and the symptoms. I didn't mention cadmium. I didn't discuss cadmium. And cadmium is a lesser known toxic metal, but it's one of the most toxic. Some say, I believe it's the second most toxic metal next to mercury, but it has a very high half-life in the body, which means the body has trouble eliminating it. And it is considered one of the most toxic elements on Earth. And I think mainly the mechanism for that toxicity is because cadmium is able to displace zinc in the body. Zinc is a really critical mineral and is involved in dozens of enzymes, has many functions in the body. And cadmium is able to push the zinc out of these enzyme binding sites and really cripple the enzyme. And it seems to have a stronger affinity for these sites, so it's able to really push the zinc out and cripple the enzymes. And some of the sources of cadmium include tobacco and marijuana, and also it's in the rolling papers, the paper used to roll tobacco and cigarettes and marijuana. And so that's one major source. It also seems to be found in fertilizer. So a lot of fertilizer is contaminated. Cadmium is a byproduct, I guess, of phosphate mining, I believe it is. And so all of these NPK fertilizers that they use everywhere are also contaminated with cadmium. I believe sewage sludge, which is probably high in a lot of different toxic metals, is also high in cadmium. And cadmium can also harden your arteries. It's associated with cancer and probably cause many other health issues. So the reason why there's more cadmium in the dark chocolate is because the cadmium is actually in the soil, and it's getting into the cocoa plant, the cocoa bean itself. And so the dark chocolate varieties have higher levels of this cocoa bean, and therefore higher levels of the cadmium. The lead is actually a different story. The lead is not being incorporated into the cocoa bean itself. They're finding that the lead is actually on the outer shell of the cocoa bean, and it seems to be contaminating the bean during the processing of the cocoa bean. So after they harvest the bean, they allow it to ferment on the forest floor, and that seems to be where it's picking up this lead. There's lead dust on the dirt, and it seems to be contaminating the bean after it's harvested. Now, how can that be? Why is there so much lead in the dirt that it's contaminating these beans? Well, there's, I think, two reasons that I can discern. And one is the fact that what we discussed earlier about the lead dust just being all over the place from the gasoline situation, from cars and the gasoline, the lead in the gasoline. And that could just be a long-term contamination of the soil. And that's the problem. It can also be that many of these farms have or still are, even the organic ones, using pesticides. And a particularly popular pesticide was, and maybe still is, lead arsenate. I don't think lead arsenate is used in the US anymore, but in the South American countries and other countries where the cocoa plant is grown, they may still be using the lead-based pesticide. And that may be where it's coming from. It may be from past exposure. A lot of these farms were probably conventional farms, and they used it heavily, and then maybe they switched over to being organic, and it's still in the soil. Or they may be lying about their product being organic, and they're still using pesticides, which wouldn't surprise me. And so that's the situation. The cadmium is actually coming from the soil and going into the plant, but the lead is contaminating the plant after it's harvested because it's in the soil or in the surroundings during the processing. So the organization As You Sow, when they did these tests back in 2014, the original tests, they filed lawsuits against many of these chocolate brands because they weren't telling their consumers about the risks of cadmium and lead in their chocolate. And they came to an agreement, a settlement recently, which involved these chocolate brands finding ways to reduce these toxic metals and doing more investigation and research in how to reduce the heavy metals in the chocolate. And then the article goes on to explain better ways to eat dark chocolate. Choose the chocolates with the lowest levels, which was Mast, Taza, and Valhorna, and 2 from Ghirardelli. Treat chocolate as a treat. Try dark chocolates with lower cacao percentages, like 70 or 65%. Milk chocolate seems to have less. but again, that's going to have more sugar. And don't give kids much chocolate or dark chocolate. And my conclusion, my recommendation on all of this is that even without the cadmium and lead contamination of chocolate, I still don't think you should eat chocolate. I don't think it's really part of a healthy lifestyle. That's because chocolate is a stimulant. And if you want to be healthy, you really would want to avoid stimulants, chemical stimulants like coffee and chocolate as much as possible. Now, if you want to treat it as a treat and have it rarely, that's not going to cause much harm. But ideally, you want to minimize or avoid chocolate completely. And that's because it's a stimulant. And number two, because these high levels of lead and cadmium make it much more dangerous. And there are toxic metals in other foods as well, even vegetables, likely. But when we have evidence like this, I think we have to take steps to avoid these types of foods, because there's probably a lot of things that we're doing on a daily basis that maybe we're not aware of. We're not aware that it's poisoning us to some degree. So when we see evidence like this, I think we have to take action and preferably avoid these types of foods completely. And if you're someone who's addicted to chocolate or have chocolate cravings, there's a reason for that. That's usually has to do with a nutritional deficiency. It could be that you're just addicted to the stimulation of chocolate, but there's also high levels of certain minerals in chocolate like copper. And many people may be craving chocolate to satisfy that need for copper or possibly another mineral, but chocolate is quite high in copper, and I think that's usually the culprit for these cravings, especially during certain stages of the menstrual period. And so that's the situation with toxic metals in chocolate. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you some value. I'm going to try to do some more videos like this about recent news events involving toxic metals and some minerals. And so let me know if you'd like to see that in the comments below. And thank you for watching, and have a great day.